thanks everybody for joining. We've got another exciting RiskWi's reading club ahead. Don't worry if you haven't read the paper. David's got an interesting set lined up to take us through it as well, and more broadly around the lessons he's learned around building decision support tools through quite a career and through quite a bit of experimentation as well. And I think really timely, given that in RiskWi's we're thinking about what tools for what purposes and how do we make them usable, how to ensure they get made. So we've got some brains here behind somebody that's designed and put out something that's actually quite widely adopted as well. So I'd like to welcome David again. And David, your camera might have dropped off again. I'm hoping you're still here. And if you are here, over to you. That's not a good sign. Are you there, David?
What is a technology conference without an issue with tech?
That's right. We'll blame Teams somehow. All right, give me a moment. I'm going to give David a call and see if I can connect him back up. But feel free to talk about soil moisture probes while I'm gone.
Have we come good?
You have come good. Excellent. Because I didn't have your phone number in my phone anyway, so that was going to take a while.
Okay.
All right, David. So yeah, handing over to you for your insights on decision support tools, and yeah, over to you.
Thanks, Brendan. Good afternoon for most of you, I guess. It's just noon here. So I'll just give you a bit of background onto my journey to get to where we were. I never really planned on developing decision support tools. My main job was, my first 10 years was measuring the effects of fallow management on runoff, erosion, and to some degree productivity. That was very noisy data. It only runs off once or twice a year on average, and you only get soil loss on average once every 5 years. So you have to be patient and hang around. And that's where my experience with modelling first evolved, that water balance models are a really simple, robust way of sorting out hydrologic things, at least. And after 18 years, we could say with confidence that stubble management made a big difference, from a 40 tonne soil loss to less than 4, reductions in runoff and improvements in soil moisture. Now that last bit, keep in mind these are unreplicated studies. So that was a win-win. You could reduce erosion and you could improve productivity if you got your technology right. And that's the whole conservation farming story is a whole another story. So that experience sort of led to, I got involved in quite a bit of extension activity. We developed a whole bunch of decision support tools, or we call them action learning tools. Brandon, next slide. So I've got 2 milk bottles there, and they were the water samples taken off one event. And you'd be amazed how powerful just handing that around in a field day in the sun can be. I've seen a farmer do the same thing with photos of one paddock and the other, and those photos were looked at intently. We've developed a whole bunch of approaches to give farmers and clients in general a better feel of how the soil water system works. And on the bottom left-hand corner, grain bags of 2 different water use efficiencies. Just that concept that 1 millimetre is 10 tonnes of water and it produces 10 kilograms of grain, sort of making the view that water is all important in growing crops, nothing new, but just as a discussion point. And probably our most famous action learning tool was the next one, Brendan, the rainfall simulator. Oh no, I moved that. Okay, I'll bring that back later. So, no, that's right. Go back. So the simple framework I use for helping people, if we're to get involved as professionals in helping people make better decisions or easier decisions, at any point, we've got some recent past to inform us about certain things, and we look forward to the future. So the recent past can tell us about soil water status, weed status, nutrition. Looking forward has got the vagaries of weather in front of us. So that's basically my thought schema. And next slide. So all decisions are based on some sort of forecast or experience. Many things we do are just, we're auto-programmed to do them, and farming's no different. But most of us are not very good at probabilities. We're highly biased by recent events. Whether it's, we had a good season last year, I feel more optimistic next year's going to be a good season. It's not a particularly good guide. Okay, next. So here's an example of the sort of things that might go into making a decision on a farm. And I've just put a font size on the importance. Personal preferences, fit, market futures, weather futures, and system status. And I've spent a lot of time on system status, and it's really probably not a big part of the decision point, but there are things going back to that previous image. Things are knowable there based on history and monitoring, etc. So there's less uncertainty there than there is in weather futures, whether that's using climatology or forecasts. And I will state that I've come from a view of being a seasonal forecast skeptic, and I haven't changed my mind over the last 20 years. Next, please. So back in 1990, most of us won't remember MS-DOS before Windows, but people programmed in Visual Basic or Quick Basic or whatever. How wet is now? I didn't realise it's how often how wet are 30 years plus in age, and all of how often is X mils of rain in Y days between two dates, and distributed on a floppy disk. Early version of how wet, similar. We added some animation there, a bit more complexity, some time series graphs, running a basic water balance model that's out of the same that's in pretty much all the existing cropping systems models today. Just out of interest, how often was just done by one of our staff who did Visual Basic as a hobby. How wet actually cost $1,200. Next. And CliMate was basically came out of a managing climate variability workshop, and there were a whole bunch of orphan tools like Rainman. New South Wales Ag had some really good products that didn't last very long. WA had their PyCal, and we added a few, and we sort of tried to ask the developers which bits of their programs worked best. No one had a clue, so evaluation wasn't really something that we bothered with. So that first 10 analyses, there's only 8 now, but that's another story. The next. And just to dive into one of those analyses, this is House's season, which turns out to be the most popular analysis in CliMate. There's the pick a location, a variable rainfall starting 12 months ago. Results presented as a fire chart. So I think I picked Clare because it's had a bit of a dry time. This is up to yesterday. For the last 12 months. So it looks like it didn't rain until June. So the results presented as a pie chart as a value, as a decile and a value and a horsehair plot. And I've been thinking about how you present variability. Like on some versions, you can actually use the cursor and pick what year that represented. But once you start, like in June this year at Clare, the chances of climbing above that line are pretty slim. So that mode of presentation. Now I should state that all looks pretty straightforward there. It took us many iterations of getting our wording minimised and our layout that we thought was logical based on some feedback and just trying. And we had the capability within the software for me as a non-programmer to fiddle with every word and pretty much everything you see there. Just, okay, a little bit about CliMate's journey. Next. So it's widely used. And I just took a snapshot of the dashboard mid-afternoon last week. There'd already been roughly 100 sessions with 50 users, and we're up to 19,500 registered users. Most of those are farmers, and about a quarter are advisors, and animal production and grains are the main industry. And they are the biggest number of users as well. The next product that I'll just talk about very briefly is Soil Water App. Now, Soil Water App started off just as How Wet, as a little floppy disk. And our biggest champions were a bunch of consultants around Gundawindi, and they still use it in the Soil Water App version. But the first version cost $1,200. This one costs probably $800,000. We did a few other, and we thought we'd already done it with the first version. But a call came out from a funding body. We said, well, we could probably do it better. Well, we spent the money and did do it better, but we produced a tool that's much more comprehensive and probably not used much more than the How Wet, which has got no crops in it. And in our pre-discussion, talking about how would I measure soil water if I was a farmer? The simplest is fallow efficiency, or just for this part of the world, say 25% of the rain is stored in the summer fallow. If it was closer to planting, I'd give it more, and if it was all in little falls, I'd give it less. It's a good rule of thumb. It doesn't translate around the countryside. We also developed a Bluetooth rain gauge, which I thought was a great little gadget. But we produced about 30 of them. Mine still works, but there's probably better technology available after that. Okay, next one. So going back to after running catchment studies for 20 years and measuring rainfall and runoff and soil loss, and we ran 3 of them in 3 locations, but it took 2 of us. So it was, it's an expensive bit of investment. I did some study in the US and used a rainfall simulator because I wanted to be out of there in 3 years, and I brought some ideas back from there. And we were using the rainfall simulator as a research tool at Roma. And two of my extension mates, Gus Hamilton and Dave Blackett, observed the farmers' reaction to watching the rain hit the ground in clear weather like this. And so we hatched an extension program and we dragged this machine around in central Queensland and other places, but a session in the morning and a session in the afternoon. And we set up the treatment for the first one, generally with and without stubble cover. And then we worked the crowd while this was happening and got the farmers put in the treatments for the next. And they asked us questions like, how deep are the trays buried? You know, you'd have to go and put a shovel in. So there's no trays here, this water's just running off by itself. And that was my most useful work in 30 years in government, I think, in that it had the biggest impact on the most hectares. And we ran it in various places over the years. To the take-home messages, Brendan. Active, simple, open questions are the most useful and often the cheapest. Often we were asked by the people around us, can we add, can we add? And early on we did, and it just ended up being an extra complication that no one used. So the rainfall simulation was an example of active and hands-on in terms of app development. The how, the season and how often are the two simplest applications to get your head around in terms of asking the question. They're open, like you have to have a question that you want to interrogate from your weather record. The complexity reduces transparency and trust. So we did evaluate both Sorter app and CliMate independently, got someone to evaluate them. And one of the messages was people hate passwords. And the second was they distrust derived variables and forecasts. If they're into forecasts, they get them from somewhere else anyway. And coming back to one of the earlier slides, farmers seek multiple opinions and our input's modest at best. So don't expect too much. It's interesting, CliMate gets used for land purchases when people don't know what the climate's like. But I just added this next point today. Decision support is about people learning, not giving them answers. And I think I've mentioned better to model than measure, that some of my apps and colleagues will be a bit surprised to hear me saying that. Anyway, it's been said. Evaluation was really interesting. And it could be useful if we got ongoing funding, but that's not necessarily the case. If you evaluate, funding bodies are very loath to fund software, I've found. If you do go down the pathway of developing a piece of software, it's very hard to specify what you want. Well, it was for us. We didn't know what was possible, let alone what we wanted it to look like. So close collaboration with your programmer and yourself as the program manager come development oversight. You've got to be prepared for many iterations, and that costs money. And having the back end editing capacity made that iteration between changing something, getting feedback and changing it. So I've suggested a pathway. Someone has an idea, you brainstorm it, you knock up a cheap prototype. You might go and get funding, then reference groups, pilots, soft evaluate, soft release, formal release, and don't forget about support and evaluation. And if you're lucky, you might get to the next version. I'll drop to the last point, one of my colleagues, Ken Brook, recently produced a bit of software, and he gave an idea to a mate of his, and it cost him $2 to develop a simple climate app, weather app, and I can send the link that around. It cost $2 and took half an hour. And that, to me, suggests that software development's into a whole new paradigm. And yeah, I'll probably just go back one, Brendan, for a second, please. I use models as a consultant quite a lot, but I always start off with some data of my own to make sure the model's sort of, there's oil in the engine. So I use it for data stretching and interpretation, but I rarely get new insights from that work. So I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with models. I'm thinking of big models. Okay, so that's sort of my take-homes. If you go to the CliMate website, there's a library there that's got the evaluation and other material, and there's a paper that I think you've been sent a link to. And Sorter Apps similarly has a library section with a whole bunch of information, including the evaluation. I guess in both cases, while the evaluation was most interesting, we didn't get a chance to enact on any of it because funding stopped. Now, they're both alive still, but their lives are fairly precarious, I would think. Now, if we just go to the next one, this earlier discussion before we started, that's the variability of gravimetric soil moisture for one sampling. And that's data I only looked at recently. So that's within a 3-hectare bay. That's the variation in soil water. All we ever did at the time was use the average and put the data away. And we used that to work out our fallow efficiencies, etc. So I've sat down and said, if I was a farmer or a consultant, what would I do? The next slide. They're the options. Kick the ground. Push probes, very good for clay soils. And it needs a bit of individual calibration. Rainfall charts and fallow efficiency, it's free, it's easy, and you should be looking at the rainfall records anyway. Soil cores, the concept that a soil has a PAWC, plant available water capacity, is real, but it too is equally variable. Sensors, expensive, calibration, algorithms plus local rain, and that could be your rainfall record or the nearest bomb site. And the last is if you've got plenty of money, you do the lot. So my bet is 3 and 6, but basically both use local rain. So I'll leave it at that. I've probably talked long enough. Too long.
No, you nailed it incredibly well there for 20 minutes, and I think you're at 21 minutes, so incredibly well done, and thank you, David, for that. It's not often that we'd hear about a journey that goes from floppy disk to 20,000 users, or from 1,000 for an app to 800,000 to an app to apparently $2 an app. So it's quite a journey that that David's been on there, and quite timely for us as RiskWi, because if we go back to that stage process of development, I can think of 4 or 5 little applets or potential DSS that we've got, and they're all at stage 3 out of 12. So there's a lot to think about in that process. We're specifically got this time with David for this so that we can have some discussion. So please raise your hand if you've got discussions. While that's happening, maybe I'll ask my question, and I wanted to go back to the CliMate, where are we? I think it was slide 9. Just to ask you on this. So recently, David, we've been having some workshops talking about how to discuss risk, and feels like everybody is back in love with box plots. Talk a lot about how to display variability. I'm just curious on your reflection on, CliMate doesn't have box plots. You've gone with this sort of setup.
Yep.
Was there a reason? Was that through trial and error? How did you land on not just not having a box plot, but this sort of representation of risk?
Look, it's a bit long in history, but I think the programmer said, "Oh, we can do this." I said, "Can we?" And I wouldn't use box plots. They're not something people are familiar with. So the horsehair, it basically tells its story. It's got the mean or the median. You can argue which you like. It is a picture that tells the story. A box plot, you've got to read out the deciles. You've got to know what a decile is. Don't assume that is common language. And show it as it is. Every year is different. And if you've got the ability to click on any one of those horsehairs and say, "Oh, that's 1927. I remember that one." No, I don't. Someone might. It's more interactive if you can engage with the picture more.
Thanks for those reflections. We've got one hand up.
And there's one thing that we definitely shouldn't use is probability curves.
We've heard that one from a few people actually throughout the RiskWi's journey. So yeah, please use the hands up button. Rick, you've got first question.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Thanks so much, David, for joining us for the RiskWi session here. Because one thing we've found is that CliMate, when we ask what tools are used around Australia, no matter where you are, it does come up as probably the most commonly used by growers. So congratulations, and we have a great chance for us to learn from it. Related to Brendan's question, the thing we've noticed about CliMate is it presents risk or probabilities in several different ways, even just threshold statements and, like you said, the graphs you were just talking to, and the dials and various formats. Was it deliberate to pitch the same data essentially in multiple different formats? Was that a deliberate choice, and would you recommend it again?
Yes, it was deliberate. So some people are graphical, some are textual. Some would like to hear it. So yes, that we recognise different learning styles.
Well, we'll go over to Frank.
Hi, thanks, David, for the presentation. I like the horsehair style presentation. I think it's interesting. I was just thinking, because there's obviously that the whole thing has a near-term focus, right? But you place it a little bit in the overall context. But obviously there is climate change, there's trends superimposed in it. So I was wondering if there's a value of highlighting the most recent years, in a slightly different color. So the last 10 years, for example, to see if they cluster more in the lower end, or if if there's a larger shift taking place, and how then the current year places in that as well. So teasing out a bit more value, because at the moment you show all the other years clustered together, which gives you the whole range, but maybe that range is contracting or expanding depending on the region you're in.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, there's two ways to deal with that. You can select the period of interest. It doesn't have to be the whole record. I think it's hardwired, but I think you can look at the last 30 years if you want. And the other analysis in CliMate is what trend, and that was put in rather mischievously to allow people to see if they think they have a trend in their local location. And it was put in mischievously because I think people need to be convinced that it's an issue for them, not what they hear on the ABC. Twice every hour, I've given away my bias. farmers have got a lot more to deal with than climate change, and that's variability.
Mm-hmm. No, obviously it's together, right?
No, they don't have to be. Climate change might increase or decrease variability. That has not been proven one way or the other. If you think about probabilities and how poor we are at recent memories, biased by recent events, the main thing that worries me about farming is that there's going to be a 30-year drought that's not in our record, that's in the millennial records. Thinking about climate change is not going to prepare us for that sort of calamity. Thinking about all the things you do to deal with variability in the season ahead just happen to be the same management practices. That's a biased view. You've pushed me into it.
Okay.
Over to you, Sky.
Really interesting. Thanks, David. So I, been in meetings where there's been discussion that decision support tools are a learning tool. People use them for a bit and then they stop using them. But with CliMate, and I use CliMate a lot with our work, it would seem that it's a tool that people keep coming back to. And I'm wondering what it is in that design that has meant that people have continued to use it either in their research or on their farms.
Well, Sky, that's a challenging question. I can't really answer it, but I'd speculate that every season's a bit different. So, you're just take planting opportunities is a frequent one. If you've decided you want to put in some earlier season species or varieties, then you've got a new window to explore. What's my chance of planting when that variety wants to be planted? That'll vary year by year depending on the market and how the seasons evolve. So if I've had a wet fallow, I really don't need to worry about storing any water because I'm fairly full. So that's a speculation on your question, but an interesting observation. Thank you.
Douglas, you had typed a question in the chat. Do you want to ask that?
Let me just take myself off mute. Yeah, just reading the paper that Yvette Oliver had sent through to me. So she's pretty much answered that question. And I'm formulating a further series of questions for Yvette, but I'll take that offline.
No problem. Sorry for put you on the spot there. Does anybody else have any questions for David? All right, I'll fill one in. David, if you were designing CliMate again right now, would you do something different?
Well, I just having someone demonstrate the power of these AI code writers, I think you'd start there at least for them to develop drafts. And so if you've got an idea, that's where I'd go and spend your $2 or $20, but not $200,000. And walk the corridors and test it, and then find who your clients are if they weren't yourself, and try it on them. But I've recently written a paper, unusual for me, on CliMate, so that and I was careful not to use AI in the paper, but I did use it to sort out the references. And it did it in 3 minutes what it would have taken me all day.
It's definitely changing up the process there a little bit. Yeah. Rick.
And another one for me, David. I think you've obviously struck on a winning sort of style or format with parts of CliMate, such as How's the Season. Have you ever thought it should be applied to other sorts of agricultural or grain growing data that farmers use?
Well, I suppose we felt restricted because of just project management constraints, that our data feed was from silo from the BOM via silo to daily weather variables. We did add seasonal forecast signals in it and then took them out for a couple of reasons. I can expand that if you want. But then we did get the feedback about the derived variables. So I think the technology, the approach is amenable to any data stream. Now, it could be applied to disease risk. You know, it's got to be warm and wet for so many days. There's lots of things like that that can be added. I wouldn't add them to CliMate. I'd make them standalone apps.
I think we're approaching the end now. Oh yeah, please, with our follow-up questions, perhaps from Douglas.
Yeah, I've had a bit more of a think. Sorry, thank you. You mentioned, David, really enjoyed the presentation, by the way. You mentioned about not a lot of evaluation. Curious as to your thoughts on where the role with grower groups might be as potentially being facilitators of evaluation of these kind of applications when they're being built by researchers to just ground truth. If it is a real need to have another app, is it going to be used? What's the context of how you use this within a grower's current operations and systems?
Well, grower groups are ready-made focus groups, I guess, so they're a good starting point. The Managing Climate Variability Program, which basically funded CliMate, which was a consortium of rural funders. It had a program called Climate Champions. And I spoke to them a couple of times, but it was too small a group and it became a club in its own right. So the danger of picking ready-made focus groups is that they tend to be our friends. They're not necessarily everyone that you want to engage. So that's the only thing I'd be wary of. But grower groups, like it is growers that we're aiming to support. The trick is to find a niche that we can be useful in.
Like that's a constant battle we have with any data that we collect and our subsampling of populations as well. So yeah, common to a lot of what we do. Anybody else with questions?
Well, look, that does raise the one point that's near to my heart, is that as researchers, you collect a lot of data. I collected a lot of data, and when I left government, I said, what do I do with this 17 years of catchment data? No one knew, and they still don't. But if you're in medicine, you would have to archive your data with any papers, and you'd have to archive all of that data somewhere or you wouldn't get funded again. So imagine if we had all the agronomy mat work done over just the last 10 years, if that was accessible. What might AI do with that?
Imagine if GRDC funded such a thing and got all your data plus all their GRDC data. Like, it would be an interesting concept.
Is this the moment where I talk about our data management plan and how it's a compulsory part of all of our research agreements currently? So yes, collect your data and use our approved data repositories, please.
Expand that a bit, Courtney.
So over the last probably 3 years, we've introduced a data management team into GRDC, and they've been working to look at standardised approaches to collecting and archiving data and knowing exactly who holds it and where. So all of our programs now need to have a data management plan in place, and all of the data needs to be stored in what we call approved repositories, and that means that they meet the FAIR principles of data collection and collation, data storage. Sorry, and so look, there's probably about 15 of them, but they're meeting certain standards. But I couldn't tell you what they are off the top of my head. I'd have to go and look up what that stands for. But I'm happy to circulate that to anyone that's interested in it for sure.
Courtney, that's a great development, but it's hard, isn't it?
It is, and now we have so much. The question becomes now, what is the opportunity, and how do we dedicate the time and resource to actually going through and using some of these AI approaches? And David, I think your comment is completely on point. We have now sort of starting to come up with some use cases to go back and look at historical data and see what we can find out from that. No, I know that, Douglas. It's important. I'm just helping spread the word because I'm passionate about it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Courtney, for jumping in there, because it's just such where the more you think about, and David, your observations around where AI is going, not having to spend millions of dollars on a bomb website, for example, you can do these things pretty quickly now. And it's like, how do you use this to facilitate the industry? How does this get out there? How do you get people using it and having this kind of, cycling of evaluation, feedback, and capturing that and making sure that then gets, recycled back again and reiterated into this feedback loop so that we can improve where the industry is using this data set. Like, it just seems like a great resource that could be used.
Courtney, Land and Water Australia had that policy 20 years ago, but they don't exist anymore, so it didn't help them.
An all-encompassing conversation here. Thanks everybody for the contribution and the discussion there. Just to round out, just quickly, David, are you happy for us to share slides with everybody?
Sure.
Excellent. So we'll send around the slides. There's a few links in the chat to various things and things that people have brought up. It's on there from Frank about Therese, who I'm sure everybody knows, giving a presentation upcoming soon. So check the chat box. Few different links to different things. But to round out, thank you very much, David, for that for that journey through decision support development and all the learnings that you have over that period of time. Really helpful for the direction of RiskWi and just for us to think about and muse over as well. As always, looking forward to the next reading club / discussion club. If you have ideas, papers, things you want, please let me know and we'll try and line something up. But for now, thanks everybody, and thanks, David.
Thanks, Brendan.
Thank you.